right. Here we go. We're going to get into USRPT training. USRPT
Good stuff.
versus traditional training.
You and I, we've had multiple, I think this is our biggest, controversial, biggest conversations we've had together.
Mm-hmm. It's, I love to talk about USRPT. I love USRPT. Our program, GC Club Swimming, our club athletes, we train them USRPT. I think there's a lot of benefits, but we're also going to talk about traditional swimming and how that, also it's good training. It's good training, but I guess we're just going to talk about the pros and cons of each, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about traditional training first, right? So traditional training is really a broad term. It's kind of, and there's so many other ways to train. I mean, it's not just traditional, not just USRPT. I mean, there's so many other ways to train as well. A lot of programs do like a month and a half to 2 months of just straight drilling and technique and form, and they only do 25, just working on their strokes. A lot of programs do like high level resistance training with pulleys and towers, power towers, and parachutes, and just tons and tons of resistance. A lot of programs do yardage, just heavy yardage, which I guess is kind of what you group traditional training into, is heavy yardage. And then low volume, high intensity, which is USRPT, but most programs just call it low volume, high intensity. I think mainly just because of the negative connotation of USRPT, how it's not widely accepted, and so I think they just shorten it. It's low volume, high intensity, whatever. Right. But yeah, there's so many ways to train, but really traditional training, I think was like not popularized, but a lot of people see what Michael Phelps did with his training, and the guy swam thousands and thousands and thousands of yards and is a top athlete in the world, and so they're like, oh, traditional training, that's it, just pumping out yardage, and just swimming super heavy, high volume, high yardage, and then lower intensity, but now there's a new guy, Michael Andrews, who we're incredibly biased about. Adidas, we love. Yeah, we're an Adidas gang, Adidas family for sure. And so that when he signed with Adidas, we're like, oh man, we gotta love this guy. That's our guy right there. Went pro at the age of 14. Right. Signed with Adidas, I think at 16, and has broken, I think, 100 or somewhere close to that. I think it's less than that actually, but a bunch of national age group records, and he was training USRPT, and he popularized it, and I want to make that clear. He didn't start it, he popularized it. The guy who started is Brent Rushell, and if you want to just Google search Brent Rushell USRPT, he's got lots of research articles about USRPT and what it's about, a lot of scientific data that backs up USRPT and why it's a better training method than traditional training. But let's talk about USRPT training. The reason why I love it is because it puts the ownership on the athletes, right? When you're doing traditional training, too often people just tune out, right? 10 100s on 120, the first 2 you're like, yeah, let's get it, let's go after it. Then 3 through like 8 you're like, okay, what's a song I'm just gonna put on repeat in my head, I'm gonna start at this black line, I just gotta make interval, blah blah blah, right? And then the last 2, it's like, last one, fast one, okay, we gotta go all out, we gotta go, right? And so the productive yardage in that is really the first 2 and the last 2. So it's only 400 yards of production rather than the set's really supposed to be 1,000 yards, right? But in USRPT, which stands for ultra short race pace training, by the way, if we didn't mention that, you have to swim every lap like you're racing, right? Like if you're, so to break down USRPT, take Jordan's 100 freestyle, for example. It's 1 minute, right?
It's Yeah, 1 minute.
2 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
No, for example, if Jordan's 100 freestyle was 1 minute, which it's not, but for example, if it's 1 minute, and we're training 25s for your 100 free, we would break that down into quarters, right? Because 100 broken down into quarters is 25. So a minute broken down into quarters is 20 seconds. So that's your target time, is you have to swim each 25 with a target time of 20, and then you just add 15 seconds for your interval. So you'd be swimming it on 35. So the set would look like 30 25s on 35 with a target time of 20, right? And so if you swim that first lap and you make it sub 20, say 19, whatever, then you keep going, right? And then if you miss it, say even if it's 20.5, then you sit that one out. Because neurologically, you're training your mind to never go slower than race pace, right? And so you sit that one out, and then you get in on the next one, and then you have to hit that target time every time, right? And if a minute is like, I mean, what's another easy interval? Let's do 50, right? What's a quarter of 50? I don't even know. About 17.5, right? You got to swim each 25 at 17.5 to hit a 50-second interval, right? And so if you can swim, say, out of that set, the 30 25s, if you can swim 10 of them sub 17.5, right? How much is 100? It's only 4 25s. But you swim it 10 times, right? Sub 25 or sub 50 is what your goal time is, right? So if you swam 10 25s, which is 2.5 times the race under your target time, then of course, like, you get into a meet, you're gonna swim faster than that. Right. If you can swim 2 times the amount of 100 faster than your race pace, of course you're gonna swim 4 of those 25s faster than 50. So say the next time you swim it, now you're down to 48, right? So now your target time changes to, what is that? 24, 12. Now it changes. Whoa, is it 12? Hold up, did I do my math wrong?
I think you did. You said 20 seconds for a minute.
Yeah, 20 seconds for a minute, and then 50 was 17.5, and now 48 is 4. Wait, no, it is 12 seconds. It is 12. No, wait. Because it's 20. Yeah, it's 12 seconds. Because yeah. So now your new target time is 12 seconds. So now you're hitting each 25, trying to hit that new target time. And at first, yeah, you're gonna struggle. That's a new target time for you. That's gonna be rough, right? Yeah. And so yeah, you're not gonna hit it. You're maybe gonna get 2. You know, your first 2 or your first one, and then you miss a few, and then maybe you get a little bit of rest, and then you hit that last one. But then as you continue that set, now you added 3, now you added 4, now you added 5. Maybe you did well, and now you're at 8, right? And so slowly you're building that endurance at that race pace, right? And so it really puts the ownership on the athlete. If they're not swimming at race pace, if they're not trying, if they're not dialed in and focused on each lap, each 25, then you're not going to get faster, right? And so what we call it is we're taking out that garbage yardage, and really every lap counts. Every lap matters, and you have to be dialed in. I mean, you're going at race pace, right? So if your breakout isn't solid, if your underwaters aren't solid, if your finish into the wall isn't solid, then you're not going to hit that pace, right? But in traditional swimming, it's like, oh, I just have to make 100 on 120. If you're swimming 50 seconds for your 100, yeah, you're gonna make that pretty easily, and you're gonna get about 20 seconds of rest, 25 seconds of rest, maybe, you know. And so some people are gonna sandbag it, right? And they're gonna be like, oh, you know, I just gotta make interval on this one, and they swim a 110 100, and it's like, well, your pace is 50 at race pace, so it's like, how is that productive for you? So yeah, I think it really puts the ownership on the athlete to train hard at practice. I think a misconception about USRPT is that you definitely lose your endurance, which I don't think is true. I don't think it's true at all. If you think about it, because USRPT is training event specific, right? While traditional training is like, oh, we're just going to swim heavy yardage, we're going to mix in some free, some drills, some kicks, some pulls, some blah blah blah, maybe some other strokes, maybe whatever, right? It's too broad, right? You're focusing on too many things. But USRPT, you're focusing on a specific event, right? So if we're saying the 100 free and you're doing, your set is 20 50s, right? If you make even half of that, 10, then you just swam 500 yards of a 100 free, right? And so you just swam 5 times your event distance, right? And so if you do that set, say 3 times, now you just swam 1,500 yards of training for a 100-yard distance.
Right.
And so I don't think you really lose that endurance, right? I mean, you just swam 1,500 yards at a high intensity of your target time of, say, your 100 frees of 50. You just swam that 1,500 yards for a 100-yard event. So I don't really think you're losing the endurance there. And we talked to Madison. She was on her podcast last week. You know, she said, yeah, I feel like I'm losing my endurance while doing USRPT after her first year with us. She's about to join our 3rd year now. She's like, yeah, I feel like you lose your endurance, which is funny that she says that, because her 100 back is a 102. She swam a 104 at nationals, right? Her 200 back, I think her best time was a 226, 228, and she swam a 224 at nationals. So her distance events were getting faster than her sprint events. Same thing in her 4IM over her 2IM. Her 4IM, I think she improved around 10 seconds. Rather, her 2IM, I think she went slower by like 3 or 4 seconds, somewhere around there. And so she was actually getting faster in her distance events than she was in her shorter events. And so it's like funny that people say that, oh, you lose your endurance, we're not going to do USRPT, blah, 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 blah. Well, you got to put it into perspective. You're training for a specific event, right? Even for a 50, if you hit, say, 1025s again, you swim 250 yards for a 50-yard event. Right. You do that set 3 times, you swim 750 yards for a 50-yard event. I mean, it's kind of, I see why people say you lose your endurance, but at the same time, you put it into perspective that you're training specifically for a race, and it's like, I don't think you're losing endurance there. You know what I mean?
Right. So we've been talking about, shorter distances like 50s and 100s. So
yeah.
What about people that are long distance, like 500 swimmers, 1,000 mile swimmers? What about those guys? Does USRPT still work for those guys?
Absolutely. So, I think the bulk of it, people see, oh, you're just swimming 25s and 50s on repeat. Like, how are you going to get better, faster for distance swimmers? Well, for, say, if you're a 500 swimmer, you're going to be swimming a quarter of that, which is, a quarter of that, which is 125. So you're going to be swimming repeats of 125 on your target time. If you're 500 free is, say, 5 minutes, then your target time is going to be 120. So you got to swim a 125 on 120, which is your target time, but then the interval, you add 20 seconds to that. Right. So then your interval is 140, your target time is 120, and you're swimming repeat 125s, right?
Nice. Yeah.
And so even if you make, say, 8 of them, you just swam 1,000 yards at a 500-yard event. And again, if you do that set 3 times, then you just swam 3,000 yards for a 500-yard event. And so you really are building endurance, and you're also building that speed into the 500, which we know now with Katie Ledecky, you can have speed in distance swimming. I mean, Katie Ledecky is an absolute monster. I'm pretty sure she has the top 10 records for like the mile and the 800 and whatever. Don't quote me on that. I don't actually know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me if she did. But we now know, like, yes, you can have really great speed in distance swimming. It's not just about conserving, conserving strength and energy and everything. And that's also due to hybrid swimming and the way that she swims those miles. A lot of people swim hip driven, but we know hybrid swimming is really good at conserving energy while being strong in the stroke as well. Obviously, you're not going to swim shoulder driven for distance events, but But yeah, you can absolutely train longer distances with USRPT, and you can train IM with USRPT as well, right? When we train our athletes for IM, a typical set would look like, for a 200 IM, 10 50s of each stroke. So you're doing 4 50s or 10 50s of fly back breast free, right? Oh, you know, what about turns for IM? That's so important, is those transitions. Okay, well then you do 3 sets of 10 50s, and the first set of 10 50s is 25 fly, 25 back. Now you're doing 10 50s focusing on those transitions, right? Your next set of 10 50s is 25 back, 25 breast, right? Then your next set is 25 breast, 25 free. So now you are working on those transitions. And so you can really use USRPT, building in those transitions, building in each stroke, and getting faster at it with USRPT. And again, it really puts the ownership on the athlete. If you're not going to try, you're obviously not going to get faster, right? But if you are going to put in that work, then you are going to get faster, which does bring me into my next point is, well, I'll actually talk about that later, but cons for USRPT is that you really do train event specific. So it's kind of hard to train for multiple events, right? But if you say, okay, today I'm working on the 1500 free, right? And then the next day, you're going to train for 100 back, 200 back, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. It's kind of hard to have a lot of diversity of training different strokes and different distances throughout weekly practices. But with our group, you're allowed to swim 4 events at nationals, and those are pretty much like the 4 events that we kind of focus on throughout the year. Obviously, some people change throughout and want to focus on different events, different strokes for a different meet, and that's totally fine. We train them for that. But I would say that's probably the number one con that I can think of, is that it is very, very event specific, which can be limiting. But again, if you're one of those guys who like, I'm just a 50 freestyler, that's it, that's all I do, I want to be super dominant in that, then why not just train in that and get faster and build your endurance in that, build your speed in that, and train USRPT. I'd say the other con, like I mentioned, is that as an athlete, if you're not trying, you're not going to improve in it. You have to be trying every lap, every set, every round in order to improve.